And the reality is that this is the last free country on the planet. The experiment that is America is so awesome, especially coming from a former communist who has seen oppression, who has seen what happens when the government takes control and squeezes you to death. Dude, I will continue to fight. And if I figure I have a greater obligation because I've seen what's on the other side, that's where I come from. If I don't exercise my voice, I am more at fault for this country to go into socialism and communism than those who were born here and have slowly experienced the erosion of freedom. So slow, in fact, Tim, that they don't realize they've lost so much.
I've never had a time in my professional life where Americans have been more concerned about their own self-protection.
You know, when it comes to innovations in trainings and stuff, what's interesting is often some of the best stuff comes from people outside of the arena. And I want to introduce you to a friend of mine today. I've known him for quite some time in the business. He's been a friend of mine. We've attended a lot of masterminds together. We've hung out together. He's just a great guy. And his story is amazing. His name is Bedros Keuilian. He's the Horatio Alger story. I mean, literally came over here as an immigrant from his family in Russia. They came over dirt poor, eating out of dumpsters, all of that, just washing his hair with gasoline to keep the lice out, and just up from your bootstraps. He's ended up, he owns multi businesses. He's a franchise owner. He owns a franchise company, wildly successful. Just a great guy, all in the fitness industry. But what's interesting is, as of late, he has recognized what's kind of happened in our society and the fact that male toxicity has been a huge thing. And that's really cut into a lot of traditionally outlets that men would have, Boy Scouts, a lot of the other things. And he really noticed amongst young men that there's this whole rite of passage that has been something part of culture for years. And yet we've kind of eliminated that for young boys, and he noticed this because he came up with another project that, I was interested in when he was talking about, and he basically puts executives, high-level executives, through a course. It's called The Project. And it's just, it's basically for men that never had a chance to go into the military, never really had that physical challenge, never had that rite of passage. And he has created, I've seen many people do this, from within the special operations community, and they put together, but he put together a program that truly transforms these guys into, they do this rite of passage. It is not 100%, completion. Meaning, I think he's at 25% of the guys quit in the program. It's a week-long program. It's amazing. But I'm going to let him talk about it. But the reason I think it's important for us is that we need to know the state we're in right now. And young men especially have very little to go by as far as mentors. They're told all sorts of things. And I think a positive message like Bedros is really worth hearing, and how it changes people, how they understand the protector role, how they understand the being self-reliant, how they understand how they operate in the world and being a provider, and all of those really positive things that are out there. I hope you enjoy the interview as much as I enjoyed doing it with him, because he is a high-energy individual and one of my favorite people. That's why I got the serious picture of him on the jet. And then that's the guy I know down in the corner. That's Bedros. Every time I see him, he has that kind of smile, that kind of giving. He's just an outstanding individual. He's aligned himself with some of the best people in special operations. He puts together a program that I think you'll find fascinating, especially if you have a son or grandson that is coming of age. So again, this is not an endorsement or anything. I get nothing from this. And this is not really us talking about just Bedros' project, but the state of how we train our young men and why that's so important to our self-protection. So enjoy this interview with Bedros. Hey, my friend, thanks so much for agreeing to do this interview. We're in a time in our country that is just really unique. And I thought, you had some really great responses to COVID. But I thought one of the more unique responses that you had was, really you started this program, but you really, went into it. And it's a program called the Project. And when you first, told me about it, and then I saw what you're putting together, I thought it was unique that you put together a program, and I'll let you describe it, but you put together a program that normally in the past I've seen military personnel put together, and you have military personnel, former military personnel. But I think what's interesting is you're very sensitive to where the male presence is right now, the way we're seeing the whole idea of male toxicity, and yet you understood that there's positive outlets for this. You also saw a real need, not only amongst the executive class and older guys that didn't have a chance to experience something like this, but I'd also like you to talk about, later on, the fact that you've also realized young men have a tremendous need to have some sort of an experience where they're challenged.
Sure.
And you incorporate all aspects in the project, but instead of me talking about it, why don't you tell me, first of all, what motivated, they heard your background, they know about you and your mindset and everything, but what motivated you? You didn't need to do this. What motivated you to do this project?
That's a real good question, Tim. And what motivated me to start the project, and actually I was very reluctant against it, to be honest with you. You and I have known each other for a very long time. And listen, when you're building a business, as you know, it is one of the greatest tests of your leadership, of your communication skills, of your ability to problem solve. Like, if you can't problem solve well as an entrepreneur, you're going to get left behind and your competition is going to eat your lunch. And so as my franchise, Fit Body Bootcamp, was growing throughout 2013, 14, and 15, we were really hitting that hockey stick years. I was being pressure tested. I was going from 3 employees to 9 to 12 to 20 and growing at such an alarming rate, which from the outside, it always looks good. Like, wow, look at that brand, it's growing. And any brand that you look at that's growing, Tesla, for example, several years ago, everyone sees it as a shooting star, but no one sees the pain and the frustration that the leadership is going through, because there is growing pains there. Now, coming from a communist country where my dad would always backhand me if I was to speak up, communication wasn't necessarily a strong point. Yet communication as a leader running a giant international franchise is a must. And in terms of leadership, I've never really led. I just have great work ethic. I know how to sell. I know how to market. I know how to create a brand. So I assume that I will hire people. And if they say they can do it, then they would do it. And so I realized there's being an entrepreneur and then there's being a leader. And my leadership skills lacked. And one of the reasons they lacked was because I was also dealt with a pretty crappy hand as a young boy in Armenia. Before we escaped, I was molested by 2 older boys for many, many months. Between the ages of 4 and 6 years old, I was just abused. Right. And I've never told anyone about that. And when we came to the United States at the age of 6, I was 6 years old in 1980. I find myself growing up and getting into a lot of fights, a chip on my shoulder, very aggressive, always anxious, always in fight or flight. And I buried what had happened to me for so long that I didn't even realize that was the source of it. And people go, man, you just said your dad would slap you around. Like, what about the physical abuse? That physical abuse was nothing compared to the abuse that took place back then, where your innocence is stolen as a young boy. And so as I grew up, get married, and I find myself now all of a sudden always in the red, always leaning back into vices. And today we see vices show up as alcoholism, pornography, overeating, overstimulation from television, video games. You name the vice, it is there because it's triggered by a trauma that took place that someone hasn't dealt with. So what I started to do is to do these crazy ass 6-week challenges. I said, I'm going to do something that's way out of my comfort zone. and learn to run a marathon in 6 weeks and then go run an actual marathon, the San Diego Rock and Roll Marathon. And then I've never done jujitsu. I'm gonna hire a jujitsu coach for 6 weeks straight, 3 times a week. And then he's gonna put me up against someone at the end of the 6 weeks. And I kept taking these 6-week challenges. While I was doing that, I was learning that anytime we go through physical suffering of running 8, 10, 12, 15 miles per night, training for a marathon, rolling on the mats with someone who's trying to choke you out and you don't have the experience, rock climbing because I was afraid of the heights. And so I hired a rock climbing coach and I go to Josh retreats 3 times a week and rock climb, and just petrified, man, petrified. I was afraid of the ocean because my dad had a brother who drowned in the ocean in Armenia, in a lake in Armenia. And so he had said, we're never going to go in the water, never go in the water. And so here we are living in Southern California. And I'm like, why am I not surfing? So I would hire a surf instructor for 6 weeks and learn to surf, and now it's one of my most favorite passions. But I tell you all these things because I was doing all these physical challenges, but I found myself becoming a better leader because the ability to deal with stress, to be able to calm my emotions, control my mindset, get in touch with my breathing, all of that took place during these physical activities that I used here in this building to lead a massive team to grow my franchise. Well, sadly, during that time, I also dealt with this massive panic attack because of all the stress. And I ended up working with a therapist because I didn't want to take Xanax because the doctors put me on Xanax and it just numbed my brain, Tim. And so I ended up saying, hey, look, I don't want to be on any drugs. I'll work with the therapist to get over my anxieties. Well, the therapist was like, hey, look, here's how you're going to deal with your anxieties. And he gave me some tools, and some things that I should probably share here is, for example, anxiety is anticipation of future pain. And so if anyone listening to this or watching this is dealing with anxiety, listen, there's future pain that you are anticipating, but you're not dealing with it. You're avoiding it like I was, a conversation that must be had, a breakup with the partner that must be done, maybe a firing of an employee that you just are afraid to pull the trigger on. And so you're just waiting for them to screw up again. And that gives you anxiety. So anxiety is anticipation of future pain. The other thing he taught me is action alleviates anxiety. And then the third thing he taught me was halt. Anytime you are halting, you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, halt, you are more likely to have a panic attack or an anxiety attack. So deal with your hunger, your anger, your loneliness, or your fatigue, right? And I was like, holy crap, like that was mind blowing. And all of a sudden my panic attacks went down by like 85, 90%, man. And so, but in this process of him working with me for a couple months, he developed such a relationship with me. He said, Bedros, you're pretty much done. Your anxieties are under control. You're in a good place. You're managing yourself. Is there anything else you want to talk about? And for some reason, I threw out this nugget and I said, well, listen, if I told you what happened to me as a kid, your jaw would drop, Kevin. His name is Kevin, my therapist at the time. And he goes, well, what happened? And I just started bawling and crying. And we spent the next 16 months. So here I thought that was my last session with him. We spent the next 16 months every Monday at 6 p.m. Tim, I was on his couch and we were talking about what happened to that little boy who lost his innocence, and as a young adult and a adult in his 30s was carrying the shame, rage, and confusion. And I didn't think up those words, he did. He goes, the shame, he goes, I can sense, like when you're talking, you feel shame about, like you can't let anybody find out what happened. Confusion, like did I do something to make those older boys do that to me? Did I invite this somehow? And then the rage, how could this happen to me? Why didn't anybody protect me? I was only 4 or 5 years old when these older boys took advantage of my innocence. And he explained to me that it was very normal for a young boy to go seek the attention of older boys. That's called the rite of passage. This is why knights have squires. This is why gangs attract young boys who don't have dads in their lives, because those gang members create that rite of passage into manhood. This is why the military is so attractive to boys that have had really rough upbringing, have not had a male figure in their life, and the upper leadership of those military branches serve as that dad figure. So for young boys, we do need this rite of passage to take place where a boy becomes a man. In fact, there's this great book out there called Raising a Modern Day Knight that really talks about it. And so I read that book and I was like, holy crap, there is no more ritual or rite of passage anymore these days. And so, long story short, as I worked with Kevin and I healed that little boy who dealt with that trauma within me, and as I did those physical challenges, those two things, like the mental help and the physical suffering to discover my higher self, my better self, if you will, made me a whole and complete person. Then, of course, I wrote this book called Man Up, and Man Up is really human up to your higher level, to your highest self. And I wrote that in 2 years ago in 2018, and 3 years ago now. And in it, I talk about, working with a therapist, and I talked about doing these 6-week challenges of tough things that you're not good at to get good at. And it not only makes you good at that one physical thing, but it bleeds into every other part of your life and business and family. Like, I just kept leveling up in every area of my life. So people would read the book, and these guys would reach out to me and go, hey man, you should put on some kind of 6-week challenge for us. I'm like, look, I go train for a marathon, go rock climb. I tell you what I did in the book, go do it. Well, you know how people are. They'd rather someone lead it for them.
Right.
So I got to thinking, I was like, listen, what could I do for these guys? I can't do like a whole 6-week thing, but what if I got a group of high-level executives together who have dealt with trauma, physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, and that stuff leaves scars on us, man. And the reality is 1 out of every 4 people have had sexual abuse. 1 out of every 3 people have had physical or emotional abuse. And no matter if it's physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, it lights up that part of the brain, the fight or flight area, where you're always thinking that people are bad. You can't trust anyone. You go into the red very easily. And I was one of those people. I was the executive who was just on the outside. I looked like I have it all controlled, but on the inside, I was just white knuckling through life. And who gets the worst of you? Sadly, your wife, your kid, right? Your family.
Yep.
Exactly. And so I was like, you know what? I reluctantly went to a therapist because I wanted to deal with my anxiety. Then I built such rapport with him that we talked about what happened to me as a kid. I would never have voluntarily gone to talk about that. I just wanted to suppress that and avoid and ignore that. That's what men do because we're stupid. And so I realized there's probably a lot more guys like me. And so I asked my friend Ray and Steve. Ray is a former Navy SEAL. And at the time, he was working for the CIA as a contractor, doing some missions overseas in Afghanistan. He was on his 8th year with the CIA. And I said, Ray, I want to put on the 75-hour experience, 3-day experience, where I'm going to teach these guys the mental side of healing. If you will put them through some kind of a Hell Week type experience, along with this other guy, Steve is a Marine, a former, I guess I've learned now, once you're a Marine, you're always a Marine. So I can't say former Marine because he yelled at me. So both Ray and Steve work with me and for me, and they are the 2 instructors that lead the physical side of the project. The project is called the Modern Day Knight Project, How to Become a Modern Day Knight. And in 75 hours, we go through physical, mental, and emotional turmoil where they are taught to lead, problem solve, communicate, and use teamwork. So we bring 20 men together 6 times a year. And in this environment of camaraderie, while they're being physically tested, going through awesome experiences, truck pulls, ice baths, we go to the ocean and Ray puts them through beach torture, hikes under stress with logs and tires, all that fun stuff. Plus, by depriving sleep and some food, we suspend disbelief, and that gives me the opportunity to help them journal through the traumatic experiences of their life. And for the first time ever, these grown men, at about hour number 36, 37, we have what we call the toxic cognition evolution, where we sit down and we have a lot of boxes of Kleenexes around. And for the first time ever, these men who just 36 hours ago didn't know each other, within the last 36 hours, they built such friendships and relationships with each other, because to get through every evolution that Steve and Ray put out, you have to use teamwork. And so they become brothers in such a short period of time. And they trust us as instructors, and I'm able to help them walk through the traumatic experiences in their life and for the first time unravel and unpack what's happened to them. And when they talk about it for the first time, and they realize that mountain that was so scary for them to talk about and deal with, is only just a little bump in the timeline of life. And none of us look at them in a bad way, like you're broken or you're messed up or you're damaged. But we just look at you as though, hey, you've gone through a really shitty human experience. And I tell them about mine, and then Ray tells them about theirs, and Steve, etc. And before they know it, they go, wow, these guys have gone through it too. So I teach the business, life productivity, and mental health side of during the project. And Ray, Steve, whoop their ass. There's no other way to say it.
Right.
Whoop their ass. And then we have a former SWAT operator who's one of our instructors, Matt Schneider. He teaches pistol rifle manipulation. And then we have a former MMA fighter, Aaron Alejandriano, and Aaron teaches hand-to-hand and grappling. And so it's a well-rounded system where you're taught to protect, provide, and really become whole again. And after the 75 hours, the men who graduate, not every guy graduates, because Ray, the Navy SEAL, decided that, we need to put a bell, just like the Navy SEAL boot camp training program BUDS. If these guys want to quit, they ring the bell and quit. So about 25% of the guys ring the bell sometime before hour 75. And those who graduate are part of a brotherhood, the modern day night project brotherhood, where we put them in a private Facebook group. Every week we share our 4 F-bombs, our faith, our family, our fitness, and our finances, what's happening in those 4 areas of life, because those 4 F-bombs give us the 5th F-bomb, which is fulfillment. Faith, family, fitness, and finance dialed in gives us fulfillment, which is what everyone's looking for. And man, we have healed so many men now, just over 100 men over the last 2 years, who would never have gone to a therapist. They're part of a brotherhood of like-minded guys. We meet up twice a year, once in Las Vegas for 2 days and once in San Diego for 2 days, where we hang out, break bread, work out together, and do something good for that community. And it's just this meaningful group. And we realize that as men, we've always had tribes and a men's society. And in modern cultures, that's been taken away from us, which has been replaced with this whole term toxic masculinity, which those 2 words should never be connected. You're either a masculine man, which means you're a gentleman, you're a servant, you stand up when you shake hands and you make eye contact, you say please and thank you, and you open doors. And that is what a masculine man does. He's a builder of people. You're either masculine or you are toxic, which means you're passive aggressive. You don't know how to communicate well, so you hold everything inside and then blow up at people. You walk around thinking that others are judging you and feel that you're lesser than them, when in reality they're not. And so there's either toxic men or masculine men. Masculine men are healthy. They're dangerous men. They are servant savages. They know how to serve and want to serve, but they will absolutely do exactly what you teach him, which is tear the head off of someone if their loved ones or their community is in danger. And today we're seeing that our entire nation is in danger, and these men don't know what to say and how to act. And when I post something on social media that says, hey, you know what? We should have a voice. We should say this. What if you actually didn't comply? I'll get secret little DMs from many of my friends who are celebrities or big wigs of companies who don't necessarily want to leave a comment. And they go, great job, Bedros. I wish I could say that. You can say that. You should say that. It is your duty and obligation to say that as a man, but they have become so neutered that they cower, and it breaks my heart.
Yeah. Well, that, there's a lot to unpack with that, but what I love about it is what people forget, and me having young kids again at this age, which God knows how I got my wife to talk me into that. What's interesting is I see a young man, my boy just turned 11, and they need that. They need that constant challenge, and I was very lucky. I was lucky because I grew up on military bases. So my dad was gone all the time, but I had those fill-in mentors. We had the Marines teaching us everything. I didn't realize how lucky I was until I got out of that military bubble, as a kid, and got into the civilian world and realized, oh, hell, this is unique. Not everybody was brought up like me. I literally had a tribe of guys everywhere I went to teach us stuff. What you've tapped into is something that I just think is so important, because I understand, because I see this all the time in my world, well-meaning people, come down and they try to suppress things, and it only leads to more problems. Meaning, if you suppress violence, you don't give young men an outlet. You don't let them to communicate. Look what you just said. You said, hey, at hour 36, a group of men that never met each other before, they went through 36 hours of challenges where they had to work together and do things. And what does that take? Now there's a trust built, and now they can actually do something that would have been unthinkable 36 hours ago, which would be to talk about probably some of the most intimate stuff that's happened in their life, the most shameful stuff that's happened in their life, and get it off and be in an environment where they can actually unload it. And then I'm sure a lot of those guys go on after your program, not only be better people and you know, stay after that, but also they probably seek out additional ways they can make themselves better, which is cool. But that physical outlet, that ability to be guys, to knock each other around, to do stuff, it's how we communicate. It doesn't make us toxic.
Not at all. In fact, it's very healthy, because when you think about it, you have a little boy, and immediately he just starts swatting at you. And the first thing that any dad does is you take him on your bed and you start wrestling with him on your bed or on the carpet, because that's just what they do. You look at little animals do this, like it's just in our DNA. And then you look at a little girl and she'll just grab a doll and try and nurture it and love it up. And well, why do we want to take that away from our boys when it is in their DNA, instead of saying, look, there's a place, time and place for what you're doing, for that level of, for violence, to express yourself that way. There's a time and place. There's a field, a sports field, whether it's football, whether it's soccer, whether it's basketball, to be competitive, to be violent, to be strong. There's also a place where you have to be the servant. You have to be gentle. And these are the people that we need to be gentle to. And this is how we show up as a servant, because as men, we are the apex predators. We are physically bigger than women. We have sometimes some men, and I say this with respect, Tim, like when I first met you at Joe's place, bro, your regular resting face, like I know what a gentle, sweet, kind man you are, but I also know how dangerous you are. But dude, when I saw you, I was like, holy shit, like if this guy goes berserk, like he's gonna punch a hole in the wall and you gotta run. Yeah. Because there's no control. But that's what a good man is. You don't never want to be a nice guy. You want to be a good guy. And a good guy is someone who's a servant, but is a dangerous man who knows how to control that ability to be dangerous and only unleashes it when necessary. And you know, when I read the book, Raising a Modern Day Knight, because as my wife was pregnant with Andrew, he's now 16. And I realized that, wow, he says it so clearly. He says, you know, girls naturally have a rite of passage. There's a physical thing that happens to girls that they realize, oh my gosh, I'm a woman. They start sprouting boobs, breasts, and they have a menstrual cycle. Like, oh my gosh, I'm bleeding. And mom goes, you are now a young lady. You are a woman. Nothing happens to us as boys. We get a little thin mustache, we get a little armpit hair, but nothing physical changed enough to go, I must be a man. This is why for thousands of years, many different cultures had these rituals, where one ritual from New Guinea was, as a boy is about 13 years old and he's home with mom, the dad would recruit some of the men from the tribe, and they would wear these masks and they would come into the house and pry the child, like pry him from mom. And mom puts up a whole fight, like, no, he's mine. You can't take my little boy. She's crying, she's hysterical, but she knows what's going on. She's in on it. She lets go. And it really shows that, okay, you're now no longer mom's little boy. And they pry him and they take him outside and they start beating him up. But they do it in a way, while they are rough and tumble with him, that he soon starts fighting back. And when he does, they let him win. And when he wins, the dad takes the mask off, the scary mask that he was wearing, and puts it on the boy's face. And he says, welcome to the table. You will now have a seat at the table with men. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. You now have a seat at the table with men, and us tribe men are going to mentor you on what it takes to be a man in our tribe, to serve, to protect, to look out for and ward off enemies. Yet another culture in the Roman Empire would hand a young boy a knife. As the sun went down, this ritual would start, and the men would gather together from that town and would hand him a knife, and would just a small cut on his arm to draw blood, and would hand him the knife. And as the sun goes down, he says, go into the forest and fend for yourself and only come out as the sun comes up. And when the sun comes up, we'll be here for you. And when you come out after having fend, so they're drawing blood so that animals will be attracted to him.
Right.
The knife, protect yourself, find shelter, find water, find food for the next 12, 13 hours. And when you come out, you've earned a seat at the table to become a man. Like, that is a rite of passage. That is the physical thing that no longer happens. And men feel like they are drifting through life, unaware of what their identity should be, what their purpose should be. And so we then created the Squire program, which is a 15-hour experience for fathers and sons. The sons need to be 13 to 15 years old. And it's a 15-hour experience for fathers and sons, where we literally create a 15-hour rite of passage experience for these boys and their dads. And at the end of the 15th hour, the fathers blindfold the sons, and they take them through a very dangerous obstacle course by only their voice, no touch. And so if you were standing behind your son, you would say, son, take 2 steps forward. Okay, there's a, and they see the obstacle course first. It's 50 yards straight of razor wire, rolled up razor wire, bear traps, and 2x4s that have rusty nails sticking out. And it's designed for dad to navigate the son blindfolded all the way to the end of the 50 yards. And the idea, and while they're doing that, all of us instructors are yelling different commands to that boy, because we know in life, you hear a lot of noise that wants to take you down different paths. But we all know that the inner voice, your voice of radiance, if you know what your purpose on this planet is as a man, to protect, to provide, to have purpose, and to serve, and to look out for, then no matter what you hear, they tell you you're toxic. You go, no, I'm not. They tell you being masculine is bad. No, it's not. You shouldn't have aggression. Yes, I should. You shouldn't speak up like that. You might offend and hurt someone's feeling. That's okay. That's okay. And so this young man is walking with blindfolded, navigating these traps that have been set. And we're yelling and trying to confuse them. But the goal is to listen to the voice that you trust, your dad, who's right behind you. And it's such an amazing graduating experience. And when they take off the blindfold, he says, son, you now have a seat at the table. My job is to teach you these 30 things. And we give them a list of 30 things to teach: how to change a tire on a car, how to drive a manual transmission, how to use a power drill, all the things that are so simple, but they've forgotten. And deep down inside, they still want to go like, I wonder how a manual car works. I wonder how, if I have, because every young boy, as they go into manhood, wants to know, do I have what it takes? Deep down inside, we're all asking ourselves, do I have what it takes to be a man? Like if shit went down in the mall or the grocery store that I'm in, do I have what it takes to go here? Or am I going to cower and end up letting the violence happen? And we help these young boys answer that question by the end of the 15th hour by letting them know you do have what it takes, and your dad's responsibility and the men that your dad has chosen to pour into you, their responsibility are now to make you a capable and confident man in your community. And it's just so meaningful to me.
Dude, that is just outstanding work that you're doing. And it's funny because oftentimes, what I'll see oftentimes is people will come to a training on my stuff, and they really need to go through your program before they come, because for me to overcome everything that you've just described that they have not dealt with is, that's not the time. My training is not the place to do that. And I'm shocked at how many, it was a real education for me, how many people have not had any challenges like that in their life. No rites of passage, especially for men. I can't believe the number of kids, when Sasha, my wife, and they put kids through the academy, new kids that want to be cops. They've literally never had a fight in their life. They've just, because it's been bred out of them. I will share with you one thing that I think you'll find hopeful is last week I've been big on my weight vest walks lately. And so I go through this park area, and I'm there, and I noticed when I'm walking by, I see this ring of kids, and I couldn't really see what was going on. I get closer, I see, well, there are 2 kids in the middle boxing. They got boxing gloves on, they got their shirts off, and they're all like in PE gear, like a high school PE gear. So I do one lap and I go, okay, I'm not going to say anything to him. I'm going to go around, and sure enough, I do the second lap. I got to go talk to him. And so I go up, I'll go, hey man, what's going on? You know, one of the kids, and the kid goes, well, he goes, these two guys have a beef. And the one kid yells at one of the combatants stops boxing, yells, he goes, yeah, he said something about my mom. And I'm like there, and he goes, so we figured, listen, there's a way to handle this. And what we decided was everybody agreed upon the rules where they each had a guy in their corner to help them out. And in there, and I think they thought, like, they're kind of looking at me kind of trepidation, you know, a little trepidation, thinking I was going to unload on them. And I stopped, and I swear to God, it's a bunch of little high school kids. And I go, guys, I go, it is so good to see men being fucking men. I said, you know, what you're doing, this is the way to handle it. And by the way, you two knuckleheads will probably be buddies, you know, at the end of this.
Exactly.
And I said, but it was so nice to see young guys understanding the need for the outlet, protecting their friends, letting their friends take care of their issues. But it was really positive. You know, I hadn't seen anything like that in a long time. So there are little places, but you know, what you're providing, you've helped so many guys, you know, later in life, get through it. You've given them the challenge they never got at 13 or 15, you know, and what you're doing now for dads and their sons is just huge, dude. So it's funny, you know, I've been wanting to talk to you about this because I know you're so into the world, and you get such great experts, but the twist that you put on it, you know, it's not just a physical evolution, it is a true transformation. And what you provide is just so huge. And then you got real experts who know how to get the guys to that physical point where they can finally, release. And it's just great work, dude. I've been wanting to talk to you about it for a while, and I wanted to share with my audience, you know, the work you do, and overcoming everything you've overcome. I mean, you know, they got the bio at the beginning, but you know, I think we're in a time right now where this is going to be a little tangential, but you said at the beginning, you come from a communist country. You know what it's like to live where you're squelched, where you can't express yourself, where you can't, you know, you can't say what you really think. And it's just so sad that we're seeing that a lot of across the board, a lot of people have been squelched, and willingly so, you know, that they're there. And I was always glad to see you fighting the good fight in California, man.
You know what? I think people always tell me, when are you going to leave California, man? Now's the time for you to leave California. Not only have you always been taxed to death, and I always look at the 13% tax that I pay extra in California is the luxury tax to live in this great, awesome state with great climate, the ocean, the mountains, etc. But they're like, hey, now's the time. It's 2020. Get the hell out of there. It's not good for business. Well, if every single person like me got the hell out of California, then Arizona and Nevada and any other state that's touching California, Oregon, begin to get like California, then the next state, then the next state. And this is how the country rots into socialism and communism. I'm not going to take off. I'm going to stay and fight. I'm going to say what's on my mind. I'm going to take the fines and push back. And the reality is that this is the last free country on the planet. The experiment that is America is so awesome, especially coming from a former communist who has seen oppression, who has seen what happens when the government takes control and squeezes you to death. Dude, I will continue to fight. And if I figure I have a greater obligation because I've seen what's on the other side, that's where I come from. If I don't exercise my voice, I am more at fault for this country to go into socialism and communism than those who were born here and have slowly experienced the erosion of freedom. So slow, in fact, Tim, that they don't realize they've lost so much. And sadly, it's become death of freedom by 1,000 cuts. And before we get to that 1,000th cut, I do hope that our fellow Americans wake up to what is really happening around them in this country.
Yeah, I do too, and it's interesting. I see some hopeful signs that that's starting to happen. There are cracks in the armor of the people that would love it to go socialist, but it's not even from a political sense. It's just from a freedom sense, you know. And what makes us great? I mean, I grew up when I grew up, my family was hardcore Democrat. You know, that I grew up in. My grandfather was best friends with Tip O'Neill, who was a former Speaker of the House, who worked really well with Reagan. They worked together. Like, I've never seen a country, we've allowed ourselves for a variety of reasons to be triggered into these situations where we're pitted against each other. And I think it's finally starting to have its toll, and I think people are really realizing like it's time to get back to, being who we are and what's going on. And a good step towards that is what the stance you're taking with your programs. I mean, I just want everybody to understand that you're a wildly successful person in your chosen field. This was something that you felt so passionate about that, yes, I'm sure now it's a great, additional business that you have, but the service that's provided is great. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to put your program on. I know, I watch how you set your evolutions up and everything. That's not easy stuff.
No, it's not. Preparation for each class happens months ahead of time based on who's coming, what limitations they might have. So we had a guy come through who was an amputee. But listen, you're still an entrepreneur. You still have dealt with trauma and you're willing to do the work. We will find the evolutions to work for you. And so it doesn't matter what physical or mental limp they show up with. If they show up, we're there to serve them. And quite honestly, while I have many businesses that are part of my purpose in terms of making money, the project and the Squire program are my calling. And there's a very distinct difference for me in terms of businesses that are purpose-driven to make money, and the project and the Squire program that are a calling. And quite frankly, we've had 11 project classes so far in the last 2.5 years. Only 2 of them have been profitable. Yep. I continue to do them, and will continue to do them no matter what. In terms, and it's because
that's highly. Listen, I know you charge a very fair price. I know what you put into it, and I knew for a fact there's no way. So it has to be a calling for you, and it's something that people should really, I know there'll be a lot of inquiries here. There are a lot of dads that really need something like this for their sons. They don't know they need it for themselves too. A lot of them. Hey, lastly, the one thing that I love also about your program that you put together, and I'm glad that Ray talked you into it, is the bell. And that is good. People need to have an out, and you only want the right people in there. And I think it makes your community that much stronger to know that, hey, they persevered through this. And it doesn't mean the people that quit were bad or anything like that. It just wasn't for them. It wasn't the intestinal fortitude wasn't there at that time. But I think that's essential, because you can't water down a situation. It has to be a true transformation, a true struggle. And I'm glad that so many people today aren't doing that. They're trying to just drag everybody through and lower standards.
Tim, it's funny because at some point I was going to ask you what your thought was on that, because I'm so conflicted. And that's because I'm coming from the place of wanting to serve these men, right? And I know that if you make it to the 75th hour, then we've gone through every talk that we need to have, where you're just going to dump your feelings and emotions. We're going to talk about what happened. You're going to do all the journaling exercises that take place all the way to the 75th hour. Whereas if you quit at hour number 20, at hour number 30, at hour number 40, 50, or 60, then you don't have the ongoing support from the brotherhood. Yet deep down inside, I do know that when Ray suggested we put the bell in, every class, now we're about to do the 11th, class 11 in a couple months, and it's already sold out. Again, I'm like, I go into every class like a fool. I'm like, okay, this is a class where nobody rings the bell. Everyone just sucks it up and goes through. Yet I'm so conflicted when they ring the bell, because it's like, man, I know your backstory. We talked on the phone before you joined come on. But at the end of the day, you nailed it. We can't lower the standard, and they have to want it as much or more as we want it for them.
Yeah. And like I said, I know it'd be much easier for you to go the other way on that, and probably make some certain people feel good, but that's what makes the program and the project that you have, the way you created the program for the project, so powerful. It's so counterintuitive too. People don't think that that's important, but it is important. It is important that not everybody get through, and that and it's not designed for that. It's designed because to me, it's your graduates that are more important to me than the people that drop by the wayside, because people that drop by the wayside, they do it in other areas too. And listen, we can help a lot of people, but you also have to recognize, who you spend your time on. And you're changing 75% of the class. That's huge. That's a huge thing. So no, I applaud you for that. And And again, listen, you're incredibly busy. I'm really glad we were able to set this up, and I really appreciate your time. Is there anything, everybody will have the contact information and all that other stuff, but are there any closing thoughts, especially we've gone through this crazy time. You've come out on top. You've been very flexible on that, but what do you think? What's your hope for our country, and where do you think we're at?
Yeah. So two things. First, my hope for our country is, and my thoughts about our country is, we are not even near the worst of it yet, because the way we're printing money, the way inflation has gone, the way they're working even harder through social media and traditional media to silence voices like ours is very concerning. So it's the darker times are yet to come, and this isn't me being a pessimist. This is me being a realist. And so if there was ever a time to stand up, friends, this is it. And the other thing I just want to say is that you do such great and amazing work, Tim, and your work is more needed now than ever, not only for people to be their own bodyguards and to protect themselves and their families, but to be able to gain that confidence, to have the voice, because there are leaders who come to your programs, and each of those leaders have influence on so many people. And so I just want to thank you for the work you do, man. I've known you for many years now, and you show up, you do the work, you serve the people who want to work with you, and I appreciate you for that.
Oh, thanks so much, brother. Well, listen, I look forward to the next time we can connect. Hopefully, if you get out here in Vegas, we'd love to see you again, and I'll be out your way, I'm sure, in the near future.
Looking forward to it, Tim. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, damn, I told you he was high energy. That was my conversation with Bedros. I really liked how he separated, the term male toxicity with, male, being a male and being a, toxic person, and what that is. Masculinity is something to be lauded about, something to train our people in, and there's lots of positive points to that. I have young daughters, and I want them to see their brother as a young man, and how young men should operate, and how they do interact with people, and how they do protect. My daughters are well trained. They're going to be well trained. They're going to be taken care of. It's not about a question of, one side being weaker than the other. It's both sides allowing themselves to show the best of each other. And I think Bedros is going a long way to helping young men do just that. So I hope you enjoyed the interview. Again, if you're interested in your self-protection, putting together a plan for you and your family, make sure you get over to timlarkin.com. Leave us your message, your email address. We will start you on a path putting together your own self-protection plan for you and your family. Also, please, if you like these interviews, please subscribe. Please hit the notification bell. And most importantly, share these videos with people so we can keep growing the channel. Until next time, stay safe.